Hello and welcome to Dialogue. On Thursday, President Xi Jinping announced the end of extreme poverty here in China. Well, the National Commendation Conference held for the event honored outstanding individuals and groups involved in the campaign to eradicate extreme poverty. How has China been able to lift 100 million rural poor out of poverty? How will it maintain that achievement, and what does it mean for the country as a whole? To find out more, I'm joined in the studio by Professor John Gong from the University of International Business and Economics, by Skype by Michele Guerracci, former Undersecretary of State at the Italian Ministry of Economic Development, and via satellite by Ogugwe Igegu, Policy Advisor of Development Reimagined. And that's our topic. I'm Zhou Yue. So let me start with you. Over the past 40 years, let's look at China's track record to reduce poverty. First, 700 million people in China pulled out of abject poverty. That's reducing global poverty rate by 70%. And then 100 million rural residents were lifted out of poverty over the past 10 years or so. How can China manage to do all that?
Well, I think two things are driving this. First of all, this is fundamentally tied to economic development. I think poverty alleviation is entirely impossible without, a decent pace of economic growth over the years. And this is precisely something China is able to achieve under the leadership of the ruling party here. I think the second thing is that we have a sort of a whole of a nation approach, also led by the government, also led by the party, to address this issue. It's a grassroots level kind of an effort. It's a whole of a nation approach, mobilizing, organizing all kinds of resources, and to target those people with precision. I think the word precision is something that President Xi personally introduced. There's a set of practices and methods developed here in China that have proved to be very effective in helping those people who are in need of help.
You mentioned the approach and methods, which is precision, like a surgical operation to help those people left behind. But what does it take for the government, for the businesses, and for the local farmers to really achieve that? Because it might be tailored for each individual household.
Yeah, well, there are several ingredients, as I understand it, of this sort of secret recipe here. First of all, there's a dedicated central government organization devoted to this effort. Second, they actually develop a database of each individual who needs to be helped, right? And this database is being used by different government agencies, being used as a central hub for coordinating efforts, right? And also a mechanism for evaluating the effectiveness from the government's perspective of the effort to help these people. And a couple of other things, policy initiatives, preferential sort of treatment of these people, incentives, financial incentives, economic guidance, training, other. From my university perspective, for example, we have a relationship with a remote county in Yunnan province, for example.
So your university is also assigned to help the poor in the West.
We help to the extent we can. I mean, as a faculty member, even though we don't talk to the peasants over there, we don't interactive.
What kind of assistance can you provide?
For example, we have a sort of a drive, for example, to buy products from that small county on the e-platform. On Alibaba, for example, they have a couple of products. The pillow, for example, is a very nice pillow, and also some local producers that we are encouraged to buy as a faculty member. And we spend a couple of hundred yuan.
So this is indeed the whole of society approach to tackle this problem.
Absolutely. That's, I think in today's speech, President Xi said, the Communist Party here in China has unparalleled capability to mobilize, to organize, and to execute, for something like this. So I think, this is one big ingredient of what he described as the China model, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to poverty alleviation.
So, Michele, the question is, the Chinese methods, approaches, and thinking, is it just full of idiosyncrasies, or there is a universal values for the rest of the world?
I think it's a blueprint for what China has done that can and should be used to the rest of the world. It's about leadership, clear targets, planning, and also capabilities, both at the design stage, at the execution stage. And I know sometimes we have frictions between East and West, and some people in the West do not fully understand the Chinese method. But I've been here, I see the numbers, the success. You know, if you look at this curve of poverty reduction, 800 million people taken out. This is it's not, I don't want to repeat the word of President Xi, but this is really a miracle of mankind that no other country has done in the world. It's one of the biggest contributions that China is making to the world. And because this is a model, like I said, that can be used, that should be used in other parts of the world that are still below poverty line. But the key thing that is one of the key success factors is the capability at delivering and the planning, because only when you plan, when you have steady leadership, that in the West we sometimes criticize about, but actually it is the one that delivers results. And if I may, we've seen this in the pandemic. China is out of the pandemic, hopefully for good, while other countries in the West are still struggling because they don't have that ideal mix of leadership, competence, and also it takes courage, and you need to have a long-term vision to achieve results. Otherwise, you are stuck looking at the short-term measures. That is not what countries need to develop.
So you mentioned vision and leadership. Why is it that the Chinese government can put poverty alleviation on the top of its government priorities? What do you think is special about the Chinese government's thinking on poverty issue?
Well, the reason why I think the Chinese government has this capability of leadership is because you know people do not become ministries, they don't become government officials overnight. They do, like in a corporation, raise through the ranks in the three layers: civil services, government, state-owned enterprises. In this circle that advances the good ones. So we we need to admit it's a meritocratic system. That the party chooses the best that can then be reaching the top position. And then once they are at the top, they can cascade down their competencies to the rest of the society in a kind of a capacity multiplier effect. So you do have people that run this program who are not novice in the field of poverty reduction, people who have 10, 20, sometimes 30 years experience in that.
Yeah.
And once you do that, everything else becomes easy. And this is really the key difference and the challenge that this model will have when we export it into other countries that do not have this party system that rewards competence.
And of course, Ovi, China's hope is that our experiences and practices can be learned or it can be inspiring for other peoples around the world. For example, in Africa, how do you look at China's track records and what you can take on so that it can be copied or emulated in Africa?
You asked me, sorry, Joey?
Ovi,
please.
Yeah, indeed, China's record has been remarkable because you just have to look at the figures to know what we're talking about. 700 million people lifted out of poverty in about 40 years is no small feat. And for us, Africa, where priority for us right now is with the SDGs and the Africa Union Agenda 2063, where we prioritize, poverty alleviation or zero hunger and all of these societal problems. That makes China a real shining example for countries and the continent as a whole. So, for instance, if you also look at the way we have been approaching development and development cooperation, China's experience or China's precision method, that really goes to the grassroots, to the rural areas to see how you can empower these people to lift themselves out of poverty. And that method is something that we will have to really look at very keenly. Drawing on Chinese examples like Taobao village, system, which have been replicated all around China and have been proven to be very, very, effective in, lifting people out of poverty and give them access to, to participate in the economy. So one of the things that really stands out, with the Chinese example is accountable, leadership, or what I like to call substantive accountability, as opposed to procedural accountability, which has been, really elevated or been prioritized so far, where substantial accountability really has to do with providing public goods and services. But for most of Africa, the emphasis with all our development approaches or partners and their conditionalities have always been on, procedural accountability, things like voting, elections, which, if we look at the record so far, hasn't really, really played a positive role in really expediting development. But if you have leadership that really prioritizes, substantive accountability and all of those indices, like providing access to, to education, hospitals, and all of the, and all of those, key infrastructure, social infrastructure that really energizes, grassroots life or rural development, we will be very likely, be able to lift, our continent out of poverty, because you have to understand that China has done about 800 million people in about 40 years. For Africa to meet SDG 1, which is zero poverty, we will have to do it twice as fast, and that will not be very, very easy. That's about 400 million people in 10 years, because the SDG 1, the target is for 2030. So thinking of how Africa would really realize that agenda would require new things, would require us reimagining and learning from China, which has shown real capability and capacity to deliver on
and another difference between Africa and China is China has a very strong centralized government, and the bottom-up and the top-down approaches mesh pretty well. But in Africa, there are scores of different countries and running different systems in their own, within their own borders. So how that kind of momentum can be copied in your place?
Yeah, well, the thing is, in terms of African continent, we're looking at 55, different African economic countries and economies, and within Africa here, there are very vast differences in central planning, state market relations, and all of those features. But in terms of what we can learn from China and the similarities, there is a spectrum, because some countries like Ethiopia, for instance, seem more I would say, similar to China than other African countries. South Africa to some extent, but if we Rwanda also. So with these countries that have that strong central leadership, like for instance Rwanda has a lot of similarities that can be adopted on a wide variety of issues. But I think one of the most central and one of the core important things that we have to really understand is accountable leadership is very, very important. Leadership that is able to mobilize society, plan long term, and execute, and also have that flexibility to learn, adapt, and incrementalism. That would really be something that would have to look out to. So some countries, I would say, are in a very good position to really adopt and, of course, modify China's approach than others.
Okay. Talking about flexibility, China has also invented, or should I say, practiced many shortcut ways to boost poverty alleviation. For example, electronic commerce. Mm-hmm. Because electronic commerce was considered to be a big booster for farmers who are cut off from modern infrastructure and commerce. Do you think these new business models might be an efficient way to help those people who are less fortunate to become better off? in a short span of time?
Oh, absolutely. I think the World Bank has produced several reports addressing this problem. The problem with rural poverty is a lot of times has to do with the lack of local infrastructure. It's very expensive to ship the local products to the city. Okay,
yeah.
The attrition ratio is very high. For example, they don't have information kind of a flow that's critical for fresh products, for example. And all of these things, I think, are being gradually addressed here in China. We are, in addition to the e-platform, we're cutting out the middleman, for example, such that the profit margins for the local farmers can be much higher. We're also building a local infrastructure, right? I mean, in terms of the roads, the telecom infrastructure, the training provided to the local people, how to do e-commerce. All these things are vitally important in making this model work. And I think this is not just here in China. The villages that you've been talking about, the Taobao village, for example, I know two personally. One is the small village in Jiangsu province. They're producing furniture, a brand of furniture called Saji Furniture. Another place is a very remote mountainous area in Fujian province. They produce a very good kind of a tea. They're not just selling directly to consumers in China. They're actually selling to the entire world. I mean, they're shipping products to the entire world. This kind of opportunity is totally impossible if you think about it, right? 20 years ago, without the kind of infrastructure we have, without the kind of actions, the infrastructure put in place by the government, this is a public good that the government has to step in to provide.
Mikhail, I know that you are very familiar with the East Coast economy. E-commerce obviously plays a very big part, but is it the same applicable in less developed, in terms of infrastructure, in the western regions, in the less developed mountainous regions?
It does. It can work if this is complemented with another substitute for the lack of infrastructure, which is the delivery services. I'm thinking of Sunfen and all these small riders that can carry the goods. Because when we talk about using the digital economy to help, let's say, farmers to sell products to the city, we have to make sure that we understand what we mean by digital. There are digital goods like software that is sold over the internet, or there are physical goods like an apple that can be purchased via the internet, but then it needs to be delivered physically. Both are indeed the part of this new digital economy, which in China is about 33% of the total economy. Now, if the farmer wants to sell an apple, it's different from a piece of software. So he needs someone on a motorbike that carries that. Now, China can and has done a little bit of subsidy to these ventures that can actually substitute themselves for the lack of roads. But at the same time, China also is building roads and railways that can lead these farmers to enter the society of urban society more in the long term. So it's a mix of short-term solution, I call it the riders instead of paved roads, and then for the longer term, real roads, so that these can be a sustainable and stable equilibrium between rural and urban economies. So I think very, very successful. And if I may, Africa is indeed different. We have 55 countries, and I agree, the example of Ethiopia is very strong. And one other statistic in Africa, since China has invested in the African continent, even in Africa, poverty rate have gone down from 60% down to 40%. This is on the back of the $425 billion that China has invested in Africa. And really, for the first time in the history of Africa, we see poverty rates going down in some countries ahead of the others, with the challenge, of course, of having 50 different systems, like you rightly said, that cannot just be doing copy and paste, but adapted to local situation. This is the new challenge.
Adapted to local situation. And earlier we've been talking about how China's poverty relief is actually a whole of society efforts. And recently I spoke to Liu Chang'an. He is one of the national honorary title recipient for the contribution to those reduction efforts. He's also a CEO of a food processing in Beijing. Let's take a look. His story of working with farmers in Inner Mongolia.
应该说我们从那个16年到布兰察布去建厂，我们从当初的这个1年计划是2万吨，到后来的7万吨，到这个 今年20万吨，明年30万吨，就是我们会带动更多的农民啊，去跟着我们一起去搞订单，去稳定的、持续的增收。
所以这个项目应该说对乌兰察布的农民的脱贫有系统性的帮助啊。
我们觉得就是说，通过我们这种模式呢，应该说，就建立起了这个企业和农民的这种长期的稳定的这种合作关系，也能确保农民说今年、3年、5年、10年，让他通过跟我们合作，年年都能保证一个稳定的这个收场。
那最初从15年、16年到乌兰察布，您刚开始投入这个扶贫，遇到了哪些困难？
这个我们刚开始去那个16年去乌兰察布投资的时候呢，应该也遇到了很多的这种困难和问题。一个是我们刚开始去在那儿建厂的时候，就是当地的这些，包括说一些政府的官员和那些当地的农民，对我们持一种质疑的心态，和一种这个不相信的这种眼光。他们觉得我们也像以前有一些企业似的去跑马圈地的，这个1年2年，这可能又跑了。所以在对我们的这个合作的态度上，那肯定都是这个旁观者的一个态度。但是随着我们这个包括说在这个我们搞订单也一样，在跟农民签订单的时候，他也是怀疑你，还要让你给他交定金才能去跟他签那些单子。包括说这个交你土豆的时候，让你要马上需要付费啊，这些就从正常的这个经营合作角度来说，都是不符合市场这个操作这个规律的，都能提出来。随着我们这个现在4年多的这个合作发展，农民对我们的信任程度，政府对我们的信任程度，现在已经非常高了。我们现在这个从以前的你发展1万亩、2万亩的订单，到现在我们发展10万亩的订单，都10万、20万这些订单都非常容易就能去推广，也就是得到了当地农民、政府的这种认可。而且我们这个企业就这几年的发展，现在验证了，在扶贫的这个道路上，我们不仅是扶贫了，也让我们企业从以前的这个销售额3个亿到现在6个亿、10个亿，未来我们要干到30个亿、60个亿，也有了一个未来更大的一个发展的空间。农民呢也从以前的这个销售的不稳定、挣不着钱，到现在能够持续稳定的去增收。政府呢，也把带动农民脱贫增收的一个难题，通过我们的一个企业龙头企业的带动，也解决了农民的一个持续增收的问题。同时呢，我们今年交的税还少一点，但是未来我们给地方交4000万、5000万或更多的税收，也能做到这一点。
就像您说的，是个3赢的局面。
对，所以真正能够实现了，在这个扶贫道路上，我们真正实现了企业、农民、政府的3赢。
So how to help the poor people? The idea is not to give them fish, but to teach them how to fish. That's the metaphor.
Right.
For example, this business empower the local farmers, enrich their incomes. They also grow a larger business out of this.
Right.
But can this be a prevalent model for many left behind farmers and success businesses?
Well, as I said, the most fundamental thing about poverty alleviation is business and economic development. It's a business story, basically, right? Otherwise, it cannot be sustainable. You have to be a market-oriented approach to do things like this. In the past, in the 1950s and 60s, we do something like this, but it's all sort of like a handout. You just help people, right? But today we help them to help themselves. I think that's the difference. So I think as long as we approach this from a business perspective, even though there will be government subsidies or there will be government help incentives, but they help a little bit. At a very fundamental level, it's still a business. So I think we have to keep in that mind. And in final conclusion remark, I would say, this whole idea of poverty alleviation for the last 7 years reminds me of a very famous campaign slogan in the United States: promise made, promise delivered. And today's commendation conference marks that promise delivered.
But we've also gathered some other opinions on how to tackle poverty issues from social media users. They may think of different ways and different approaches. Let's take a look at what some of them have been saying on China's special approaches and ways. Paul Delaney said, ending poverty might seem far-fetched, but at one stage, so did abolishing slavery. If all billionaires paid an extra 1.5% tax on their wealth, it would raise $70 billion a year, enough to eliminate poverty in all countries. It can happen. Well, these are political choices. This one way of looking at things, different from what you said.
I beg to disagree.
Is it just about economic progress or redistribution of wealth? Michaela, your take on this?
Well, it's the trickle-down economy that in the US, Professor Stiglitz, Nobel Prize, criticized because it did not work. Actually, in China, did work. Let's say, get some people rich first and the others will follow. I don't want to quote Deng Xiaoping or others. It did work. The disparity.
The key is, how do you connect the rich with the still poor? In what way? Do you tax the rich to subsidize the poor, or what?
They need to buy cars, they need to go to the restaurant, they need to travel, they need to buy clothes. Someone has to make this clothes, someone has to sew them. They need to eat, someone needs to produce the apple. So there is let's say, a hand of God that can transfer this wealth by purchases, and this is the concept of trickle-down economy. And then, yes, there are forced transfer like taxes, but I do believe that even rich people need to see the benefit of giving up a little bit of the wealth, and it could be because someone will deliver them the goods that they want, or because of the stability of the society. They don't want to have thieves and criminality raising in the nice places where they live. And this combination of natural transfer imposed, they need to really be clearly explained to the people that kind of pay for that. Otherwise, they would put a barrier. They say, no, this is what we see in Europe. People don't want wealth taxes because they say, I've earned my money. But luckily, this is not happening in China. And I've seen that this natural transfer does help, of course, for the last mile, the last 20, 30 million people. The targeted poverty program with the individual database was necessary to bring the number down to zero.
John, you want to add something?
I just want to add 2 examples to show this kind of approach is not going to be working. In Africa, for example, there's tons of foods donated freely to
charity
food. Charity food, yeah. But it destroys the local industry. The people donate clothing to Rwanda, for example. It kills the local garment industry. So I think, this approach that just by taking some money from the rich and give it to the poor, it's not going to be sustainable. There are plenty of examples in the world that this approach is what I call a recipe for failure.
So you think the Chinese will double down on their efforts, not just doing charity for poverty relief, but also empowering the rich by giving them better economic
Absolutely.
opportunities?
I think fundamentally this is going to be a business.
All right. Thank you very much, John. And thank you, Michaela, for your insights. And you've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. And today's topic is poverty relief. I'm Joe in Beijing. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.